This episode is brought to you by JT Clothiers. Hi, I'm Chad Hennings, and you're watching Forces of Character podcast. My guest this week is Bob Dees. Bob is a graduate of West Point. He is a retired Major General with 31 years of military service. He's a vice president at Liberty University, served a little bit in corporate America, was executive director for military ministries where he concentrated on post-traumatic stress with our returning veterans, was the founder of the National Center for Healthy Veterans, and is the author of the Resilience Trilogy. Bob, welcome, and what haven't you done? What a phenomenal, career. You know, multiple commands, etc. But I think most importantly for all of us here, you're born and raised in Texas. So kind of welcome right. And let's kind of just start there.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about your upbringing. Born in Texas, who are your early influences in your life in regards to family, coaches, teachers, etc.?
Yeah. Well, I was born in Amarillo. And at age 11, we moved down to Houston. And then after Houston, I graduated from high school, went off to 31 years in the military, 21 moves, 31 years. And then we moved back to Austin. So we just can't get away from Texas. We've now moved to Virginia for the veterans work. But from an early age, I just remember Amarillo is not very hilly. And I remember as a young boy, I had an older brother who mentored me a lot. Sometime one of his friends put a rake in my head, and I went into mama crying about, so I got some good resilience training early on as a young boy. And then my mama would, because I was sometimes a bit of ADD, she would give me a magnifying glass. And in Amarillo, the best thing you do is you go out and you stir up a red ant bed. And with that magnifying glass, I learned all about focus. And if you learn to focus as a leader or whatever, if you learn to focus, it's amazing the effects. And that was very helpful in employment of Hellfire missiles later in life. So it started off early. I just had great family of aunts, uncles, parents, brother, sister. And so I was blessed in that regard. I came to faith in the church at age 11, but then we moved down to Houston, and frankly, I wandered as a teenager. Then I went to this place called West Point, small industrial school, Hudson River. And as I was at West Point, I recognized very quickly, they had the audacity, you've been through this drill. They took away my hair, how dare they? Took away my Pontiac, that was terrible. They called me a plebe, and I'm the scum of the earth. And I recognized, in all honesty, if I dug down real deep, I would come up empty-handed. And that generated spiritual recommitment, renewal in my life. God provided a mentor, a guy named Andy Seidel, who was 10 years later a math instructor. He was an engineer officer. And Andy and Gail are mentors for me and my wife today, 50 some odd years later. They're still building into us. And so that role of mentor there was great. And then that mentor theme, when I got into the military, it was the same way. I remember when I was a lieutenant, aide-de-camp for a guy named Tiger Honeycutt, General Tiger Honeycutt. He was notorious, Hamburger Hill. People either loved him or hated him, but he was quite the notorious figure. And the only time he chewed me out was when he heard on the phone that I was talking to my wife and our little puppy was trapped behind the washing machine. And he about ripped my face off and said, "You get home, you take care of your wife, you take care of that puppy." And that, he would eat nails for breakfast, and yet he had this inner soft side to do that. And then when I first had my first interview with him, he said, "My job is to make you a successful company commander this year." And he did, so he invested in me is the point. And that was a good role model for me because I've found it very powerful to invest in other people's lives. And then I ended up as a battalion commander going to a place called Fort Carson. I showed up, I expected a nice warm greeting, a cushy pillow and this, and my boss, new boss, a brigadier general in charge of operations said, "Pack your bags." And then he took me to the National Training Center. I'd never been in a mechanized outfit. It was a new environment I was in. And for a week, he coached me on how to be successful in desert combat in a mechanized sense. And that was, again, worth its weight in gold. So everywhere I look, I can't look anywhere, and also spiritual growth in the same way. I can't look anywhere without seeing the fingerprint of a powerful mentor that was selflessly mentoring me for no good reason, really, but they were. So
that's awesome. And then you went on, to command and continue to increase command. Just share some of the other commands that you had as you progressed through the ranks.
Yeah, well, I was when I was the aide to that general, he was the assistant division commander for the 101st Airborne Division. So it meant a lot to me to go back after battalion command, brigade command, and all that into that same position as assistant division commander for the 101st Airborne Division. And that was a great assignment. I'd been in that outfit 3 times, so I knew it well. In that short time, I had 9 months there before they got pulled out by surprise to deal with a crisis in Korea. And they took me to Korea on 9 days' notice. You usually have a year to prepare for that. And when I got that word, and my wife was with me when I got the phone call from Chief of Staff of the Army, said we got to get you to Korea in 9 days. I said, Lord, I can't do this. And it was like I almost felt like I fell on my knees, and I got this word from reminder of a chaplain's sermon at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. It was about remember Nehemiah. And so Nehemiah was not just an inspiration to me. In the 9 days I had to prepare, I used Nehemiah as a blueprint for taking command in a crisis. And it says, keep things in your heart. And it says, one hand on the weapon, one hand on the work. It says, you will have opposition. All these things I encountered in Nehemiah, but that became my blueprint for taking over a crisis scenario on the demilitarized zone in Korea. And people say, what was your best military assignment? I say Korea. What was the worst? Korea. But it was the best because we saw God show up. It was the best because we were able to take a team that was downtrodden, that had a moral crisis and a physical crisis, and with leadership, with selfless service, with building a team, with vision, all the things that we know to work in leadership. It was so fulfilling because everybody responded. We did well. The lives that were being lost, we lost 19 lives in the first 6 months. And
Were
then
these in training accidents?
it was
or
training
mishaps?
accidents, yeah. Because part of this moral dilemma was that the commander, in fact, was a closet alcoholic. And when you're in Korea, above what they call the no smile line, you don't have a lot of supervision, and people were covering for him. So I went in, I relieved my chief of staff of the division, which is my right-hand man, in about 3 days because I was getting called ahead of time. And then when I got there, I saw that he had been covering for the division commander. He was even worse in a moral sense. And so had to get rid of him. But God provides when you...
Amen to that.
Yeah.
We both live under an honor code. Well, we will not lie, steal, or cheat, nor tolerate anyone among us who does. That aspect of toleration, I can see where that chief of staff was rationalizing potentially in his own mind that aspect of, I got to cover for my wingman, my brother.
That's right.
Talk a little bit about that, the difference between caring for your brother, but if you do see a moral failure in your brother, how to confront.
Yeah. Well, it's a very tough thing, as you know, but there's a fine line there. I talk about identifying your red lines ahead of time to avoid temptation, but also to have more clarity when you have to make difficult decisions. And so that chief of staff's red lines were not defined at all. He in fact, in addition to accommodating or covering for the boss, he also was drinking a whole bunch and also carousing with the boys, and had de facto become the division commander, assuming a degree of authority far beyond what he was authorized. So it was a complicated scenario, but you just got to walk through it with wisdom and with the Lord's guidance, and that's all I can say. They're all different.
Yeah, but you mentioned a part where you defined beforehand what your red lines were, kind of your go no goes.
Right.
And I talk a lot of different times to individuals, encourage young people to learn the aspect of visualization, where you're visualizing yourself in certain situations beforehand.
There you go.
As an athlete,
Yeah.
I would visualize, what is the offense as a defensive tackle? What is the offensive set that I'm seeing? Is it more run, more pass? Where you're going through mental reps prior. And in the Air Force, we call it chair flying.
Yeah.
Where I would practice missions going through, making the radio calls, making the different procedures, doing the different checks, etc. Again, getting mental reps, but people don't realize we can do the same thing from a moral character standpoint.
Of course, yeah.
In a leadership standpoint, I tell young people too that understand what your red lines are before you go out to that party and someone that you came that was driving is drinking. Do you get into that car or not? These are certain red lines, no-goes that you cross.
Yeah, exactly.
And that application, and this is kind of what we talk about in this podcast, is lessons learned in one field or sector of your life that translate to others.
Right.
So, you talked about that. Did you have any other leadership command experiences where you've had, you turned around one unit and you climbing in the ranks, any other experiences that helped you in regards to defining where you ultimately end up being as an expert in resilience?
Right. On your first point, you said in the Air Force, cockpit flying or chair flying.
Chair flying, yeah.
Well, in the Army, we call it actions on contact. And in here, there's a whole section on actions on contact, because when we rehearse responses to trauma, Tournier, the Swiss theologian, said, we fall the way we lean. So we want to rehearse actions, and we want to be leaning in the right direction so that when something happens, we have a response that is, increases the potential positive outcomes. Now, related to what you say, I had another instance. I went in as a battalion commander, and two things that come to mind. KYK-13 is a highly classified security device. One of our tank commanders lost it in this big desert area. Okay, and that's a no-no. You're supposed to report within 6 hours to the National Security Agency. So I was in hot water as a new commander. I'd only been there like 3 weeks. And the whole chain of command, and then the net is that we ended up in the field searching for this KY-13 for 1 day, 1 week, 2 weeks. So, it's part of it's punishment, and part of it's with the hope that you would find it. Well, as it turned out, if you stay steady in the harness, one boot in front of the other, it garners the trust and loyalty of your chain of command. And so they seem to trust me more than ever before. And I say, he who is faithful in little will be faithful in a lot, because as a young lieutenant in an airborne outfit, they have a prop blast. You jump off the table, drink a big swig of all this alcohol and gunk, and then run off saying airborne. Well, when I jumped off the table, I just didn't feel like that was the right thing. I'm not violently opposed to alcohol, but at that time, I just thought that was, to my new command, my peers, I was making the wrong statement. So the battalion commander, 6'4", eats snakes, all that. He handed me this thing, and I handed it right back, and I said, "Airborne, sir," and then I ran out doing like this, and he didn't say a word. But then pretty soon after that, I saw that I was being given responsibility far more than than my peers, because I think they saw that there was a standard there. I had a little red line, and I wasn't being obnoxious. I wasn't beating my chest about it. I just did it and moved on, and they honored that. And I think that's sort of the way God is sometimes. Just do the right thing, and sometimes He blesses you.
Overcoming adversity and kind of having mistakes, whether it was mistakes of omission or commission, like on your part just there. I just want to read a quote from your book here on resilience. Resilience represents the ability to become better, not bitter, to bend but not break, to return to full function and potential after an internal or external shock. In short, to bounce back. I like that, to bounce back, like a rubber band, coming back. During your commands that you had, did you ever have those times? You've outlaid a couple, but mistakes made where you had to come back and bounce back. I'm not necessarily saying from a moral failure,
right?
But from a setback, an obstacle that you inability to overcome, where you exemplified resilience and were able to come back.
Yeah, let me tell you a little scenario. I think it gets to what you're asking about. I had been in command 2nd Infantry Division, took command in late August, and now it was Halloween night. And there was a golf mat and a little net to hit golf balls. And I hadn't had the opportunity to hit golf balls my whole time in command. I was dealing with the crisis and all this. But it's Halloween. I finally walked past that thing outside my hut in Uijeonbu, Korea, and I said, I'm going to hit some golf balls. So I hit the first golf ball, and then my bat phone rang. And they said, sir, the helicopter's cranking. We've got 9 guys under the water, and they're drowning. We got the Korean divers going after them, but a armored personnel carrier fell off the Imjin River Bridge, plunged 90 feet, and is now stuck 40 feet under the water line. So, you know, and so I said, okay, I'll be right there. So I flew out there. I was on one end of the bridge, and the battalion commander and his team were on the other end of the bridge. They were working the problem. So when I landed, just typical, here comes this crowd. They're coming towards the division commander. The battalion commander was really dragging his head like this. And when he got there, I said, Tom, we need to honor the fallen, but we got to lead the living. You're the battalion commander. You need to tell me what you need, but you got to go back and work this problem. We still got a chance we can save those guys, and even if we can't save them, we're leading a whole bunch of other folks. So let's set the right example. And so for some reason, it sort of like put steel in his backbone, and he stood up, and he did an about face, and he went back, and he did the right thing. And he wrote a section about that whole scenario in Extremis Leadership. There have been times where I would think early on when I was in a company command, I was more politically correct. I might have tended to support the process or the system more than supporting my team. I remember going through an inspector general inspection, and it was all about, you know, painting rocks, shining stuff up, and doing well on the inspection. And after it felt like gravel in my mouth. We did extremely well, but I knew I'd done the right thing for the wrong reason. And so I saw that sometimes as a young officer, I had the wrong motives. And over time, the British use the expression taking the mickey out of somebody. Over time, the realities of life in the infantry, on the battlefield, things like that, those realities sort of take the mickey out of you, and you have a little more sober approach to things, and it purifies your motives for doing things when you see the life death that you're facing.
Hey man, you know, and that reminds me of another concept regarding like mindset. Mm-hmm. You can achieve, there are multiple pathways to achieve a particular goal. Mm-hmm. You had one thing being more bureaucratic, follow the process, not that I care about the people, but it's just accomplish the goal. We're going to do whatever it takes to accomplish that goal.
Sure.
Versus accomplishing that goal of taking care of the people, the relationships are more important. Mm-hmm. I mean, you both get to the same area, but it's the journey. I mean, for you and for those around you, impacts in different ways.
Yeah.
Make sense?
Yeah, I'm sure they did the same thing at Air Force, but at West Point, you know, accomplish the mission, take care of the troops. Accomplish the mission, take care of the troops. It's almost like you had a tattoo on your head. And so when I graduated, it was theoretical, but then it went from my head to my heart when my RTO died at my side. My radio telephone operator died nearby, and it went from here to here. And then over time, when I saw the ethos of the blue-collar workers in the military, the sergeants, the privates, and so forth, and their selfless service, it went from head to heart to gut and became a divine calling to take care of the troops in real ways. So,
you know, and that's, you know, from character leadership training, a lot of times people have a difficult time from taking it to that academic definition of what that trait might be.
Right.
To put internalizing in your heart, then onto your gut. That you know, we can sit here until you own it, it doesn't truly become a part of you.
Right.
And that's you know, and that unfortunately sometimes has to go through difficult circumstances in life.
Oh, yeah.
You got to live life.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily, it's the journey that's more important than the destination.
We had a bus rollover at Fort Carson, Colorado. I was battalion commander. Inadvertently, or for some reason, that's the way most accident reports start. For some reason, the bus rolled over about a 40-foot cliff, and there were 80 people on board. There was a lady that was in her 70s, and there was a young baby. And the net, when that happened, we had a mass casualty situation. And in that process, I was extremely criticized by so many people because I was calling in medevacs, and I frankly was somewhat divorced from the trauma on the ground because I was working the life support and getting helicopters in and out and the hospital and all that. And so they were very critical. It's obvious, battalion commander doesn't even care. You know, we're hurt and we're this and so you just sort of have to weather the storm. And I learned, we did a press conference, and I just took all the slings and arrows, and then we turned that setback into being designated the best battalion for family support in the whole division. And so that was just an example of making lemonade out of lemons. And then had that not happened, when I was in Korea as the commander and I had to evacuate a Korean village because of a terrorist bomb threat in the middle of the night, and all these Koreans were madder than hornets, and they wanted me. There was a motion on the Korean Congress floor the next day to take me off of the Korean Peninsula because I had inconvenienced these people, and so because of that first scenario, I said, okay, let's have a press conference. We did a press conference. I took all the slings and arrows, explained best we could and why and all that, but some of them were still a little obstinate. And then, but I learned, so our public affairs officer then opened up the back partition in the room, and we had a steak dinner for all these upset Korean people, and the coup de grace was a 2nd Infantry Division ball hat, and then we were in like Flint. So we took, again, lemons into lemonade, pain into purpose, whatever acronym
Sure.
you want to use. Yeah.
No, that's a great analogy, and as we're going to transition more towards this, post-career, post-military, what you've defined your leadership style, your career was truly about the people, was about the relationships. Can you identify any particular incidences where that aspect of priority over the relationship of your troops, caring for them, examples that you might be able to share where that aspect of caring for your troops and that led to that aspect of resilience?
When I was a young officer, one of our soldiers drowned, and I was the commander. The platoon leader was the one that was supervising. In the net, the person drowned. There was an Article 32, sort of equivalent of a grand jury investigation about this, and I was sweating bullets for like 3 months while this was going on. Didn't know what would happen. And then the Article 32 investigator exonerated me, and so I got back on the saddle and was doing fine. Later in life, there was a young lieutenant standing in front of my desk when I was 2-star general. And I happened to know her father, who was in charge of personnel in the whole Army. And he could have easily stepped in or tried to, let me. He didn't. He just let me handle the whole scenario. And she had done something really dumb. And so I told her, I said, all right, I'm going to give you grace this time, but because you fall the way you lean, if you don't start leaning in the right direction, you'll end up right here again. And you better believe there's no mercy if you show up again in front of this desk. And she took it on board, and the net is that she then became a tactical officer at West Point, lieutenant colonel, and went on to do great things in the Army. So this notion of, the process, the easy thing would be to slam the book at her, wash your hands of it, and everybody's happy. Your commanders don't question you and all that. And yet I just sensed that grace was the order of the day for her. And that was paid off because she became a great officer. A lot of times people would say, well, why don't you relieve that person? How can you continue to? And I said, well, that person has made a mistake that they'll never do again. At least that's a known in their life. I bring on a new person. I don't know what mistakes they'll make and what lessons they've learned. So.
For over 50 years, JT Clothiers has been a respected family-owned clothing store for men and ladies in Denton, Texas. Whether you're looking for the perfect suit, an elegant top, or unique accessories, JT's offers a personalized shopping experience. The staff not only remembers your name, but also takes the time to understand your style, ensuring you always walk out with something you love. JT Clothiers carries world-class brands from around the globe, bringing you the best in fashion from far and wide. Whether you're shopping for work, play, or something in between, they got you covered. Conveniently located on the corner of Oak and Elm in historic downtown Denton, JT Clothiers is a must-visit destination. Stop by, support local, and let them know you came from Forces of Character podcast to receive 10% off your first purchase. Head over to JT Clothiers today, where timeless style meets personalized service. Makes a lot of sense. So after 31 years of military service, retirement, how was that transition for you?
To be honest, it wasn't too bad, and I'm a little different perhaps, but my retirement decision rule was if I think there's people around me that can do as well as I'm doing in a particular position or what I'm doing, and if I feel like I can do better or I've been equipped to do something else better than most people, then that is a good decision to make the transition. So I did that, and it was really valuable because I felt like I was called, being pulled into, and frankly, it was my whole life has been about ministry from West Point, and so it wasn't a major change with my focus on ministry. I was just changing my uniform. I'd been an ambassador, if you will, to the military for my whole career, doing that, and yet then I had an opportunity to lead some Christian organizations and make what I felt like for me would be a unique impact in the lives of veterans that I wouldn't have otherwise. So and so the transition wasn't bad. Now that said, when you get out, you sort of have to do a little tent making. So after a short stint with Electronic Warfare Associates, I was hired by Bill Gates and team at Microsoft. And I had a lot of personal interaction with Bill Gates, and so I was there for 2 years working Microsoft. And then I went to him at the 2-year mark and I said, Bill, I'm going to resign from Microsoft. I have another calling. And he looked at me like I had 5 heads. He said, what could be more important? I said, I love it here at Microsoft. What could be more important than that? And I said, my peeps are killing themselves. And it was in the early days of Afghanistan and Iraq. The suicide dynamic had just gone through the roof. And I just didn't feel like I would be honest to my calling to not deal with that. When I was a young lieutenant, I'd been in the 101st Airborne 3 weeks, and I get a call late at night, come to Sergeant Smitty's house trailer. Never a good call. I went, and he had killed himself in the back room. And it's the night before Easter, and I talked to the widow and her 3-year-old daughter. As I said, how can I help? And she said, well, we hit Easter eggs today. Would you come back in the morning and help us gather Easter eggs, and let's give my daughter a normal Easter? So I did that. Clearly tragic, life-changing for them, but also tough medicine for me as a young leader. And so early on, I had this empathy for and sympathy for the whole suicide dynamic. And then over time, that just amplified as I saw that many more times in active duty. And then after I retired, I was walking the Vietnam Wall with a lady that referred to herself as a Vietnam widow. And so I said, hey, we walked the wall, and she got to the T's, and she started running in a circle and said, John Thompson, where is he? And I looked at her, and she said, oh, he didn't die in Vietnam, but he came home with an expiration date. Wow. And so immediately I saw that Vietnam Wall, and could be a wall for every other conflict in American history, is just the tip of the iceberg. And below the water level, you have the people that have taken their lives after the conflict, but you also have families that have been fractured, minds and bodies broken, and there's a lot of people down there that are truly at risk, that are just frozen. And it takes somebody like the organization we're going to talk about to go into that iceberg and do a search and rescue, get them out of the iceberg, and then help them. And a lot of these people in that iceberg don't want to be found. And they're the truly at risk that are going to take their lives, that are alcohol, substance abuse, etc. So that's an understanding of the veteran demographic that I seem to have now, that really called me to go to the toughest of the tough, because we're helping a lot of others. It's the toughest of the tough that are the ones that that really need help.
That ended up falling through the cracks.
Yeah.
What ended up motivating you to study resilience, to actually write the books that you have
Sure.
authored?
I firmly believe that resilience is a critical life skill from cradle to grave. I've got a resilience website called resiliencegodstyle.com, and on there's a blog. And in the blog, the most popular entries, 2 of them, one is raising children who bounce, and the other one is resilient aging, and then everything in between. So what convinced me was raising children who bounce. I did science experiments with our children that went to Outer Banks in North Carolina for 9 years running. A tribute to my wife for staying that, all the cousins are really bonded now. So we would do science experiments. And the first science experiment that started this whole process, I had an egg. And I said to the grandkids, do you know that if you throw an egg just at the right angle as hard as you can, it'll actually bounce back to you? And so the grandson said, give me an egg, Dad. And the granddaughters looked at me and said, oh, I don't know if that's going to work. So I said, okay, throw your eggs. They threw them, and now we have scrambled eggs, And I said, oh, I guess Dad was wrong. But there's also a tennis ball out in the yard. So go out and find your tennis ball with your name on it. And they all ran back. And then the question is simply, well, would you rather be a tennis ball or an egg? And they said, oh, we want to be tennis balls. And so I said, okay, let's look into that a little more. And then we did successive science experiments. One of the others that we did was a lemon eating contest. Teaches us all about bitterness and how we loosen our grip on bitterness through gratitude and forgiveness and conflict resolution, all that thing. So there's a lot of simple cookies on the bottom shelf examples for grandchildren that hold true, and they're really based on biblical principles. And then frankly, when I shifted gears from that thing, military ministry you mentioned, into Liberty University, I had the luxury of really focusing for a period of time on writing. And sometimes I would be writing after 10 minutes, sometimes it would take me 3 hours. But I would work my spiritual preparation and think and reflect and all that. And all the resilient stuff came out of that. It wasn't like I can't claim there's a grand plan or that I had it all mapped out ahead of time. Somebody just challenged me to write some books, and so I was dumb enough to say, yes, I'll write a trilogy. But in reality, worked through that trilogy. We wrote 3 books in 3 years. And it was just a pretty powerful, productive time. And all that resilient stuff came out of it. Yeah.
So from your active duty experience of leading troops and helping soldiers, families through conflicts, now you're in the civilian world. What experiences did you have that ultimately led you to wanting to found the National Center for Healthy Veterans? Did you see certain NGOs and nonprofits that were doing things well, not so well? And you talked about the kind of having those ones that are struggling greatly,
right,
that can't overcome those obstacles. So what motivated you, in essence, to start that National Center for Healthy Veterans?
Right. Well, you put your finger on it. I felt like there was a gap. As I observed, there's like 40,000 veteran helping organizations across the United States. 40,000? Yeah, right, in various ways. Whether it's dogs or this or this or this. So a few of them are faith-based. So one, I knew that faith made a difference. So I wanted to, if I was going to do this, it was going to be a faith-based organization. And then secondly, a lot of them are based on performance enhancement or increasing the lifestyle of veterans. And those are all good. And maybe a fly fishing trip or a weekend retreat or this or that. But when I was the editor of this Combat Trauma Healing Manual, as I really got into the depth of combat trauma and PTSD and traumatic brain injury and moral injury and adverse childhood experiences that are precipitated by military service, all those things, I saw that it's much deeper, and I started to understand the faces of the people that were impacted by these things. And as I understood the faces of these people, I recognized that there weren't many or any, frankly, that I could identify that were truly doing what I wanted to do. And so I say what we're doing now at the National Center for Healthy Veterans is a holistic integration of proven best practices. You know, people would come at me with, "We found the solution for PTSD." And, you know, that's exactly right for some. But there's not silver bullets that apply to everyone. That I haven't found them. And therefore, this broader, comprehensive approach has been very helpful. One of the things is that God is the natural healer. And so we have like 350 acres of land with 30 horses and a lot of other animals and things. And that provides dignified work to provide purpose and self-esteem. That provides a natural healing process. We had an Apache pilot from Fort Lewis that came and visited. He walked around the property for 2 hours. We just walked around talking and looking at things and watching the river. And he at the end, he commented, he said, "This has been worth more than 2 years in my counselor's office." So there's that therapeutic value. And then also I was watching the Army's resilience efforts and Walter Reed and all the assistance to our wounded warriors. And a lot of great work has been done, but there's not been this holistic integration. You know, at Walter Reed, for instance, they developed a garden to walk in, maybe 100 yards long with some plants and things, and that's where the wounded warriors will walk to get their therapeutic input, you know, from nature. Well, you know, that's nice. It was based empirically on the fact that makes a difference. The Japanese call it forest bathing. But for us, I recognize there's far more than we can offer. And then in addition, we offer equine therapy. We have faith-based trauma recovery, life skills programs. And we're uniquely a longer-term program. We're I say a crock pot in a microwave society. And this crock pot is a 9-month program. So people come residentially. They go through resilience, they go through trauma recovery, they go through career preparation in a 9-month period, and with a lot of other things such as sleep hygiene, such as financial literacy, et cetera, so that they really are able to do a life reset in that period of time and are able to get back out on the street and do good things for America. You know, our tagline is return healthy veterans to America. And so that's what we're doing, and it seems to be working. And I think we have a unique niche in the marketplace. That's why I started it, basically, because there was a gap in that area.
You know, I appreciate so much what you said, that we're in a microwave society. Everybody wants, you know, take that one pill. That's, you know, we're finding that in the MAHA movement right now, currently.
Right. Yeah.
With medicine, it's unfortunately, we are unique. God created each and every one of us unique, that one pill does not cure all, or one treatment does not cure all. And the holistic aspect, I mean, again, totally appreciate that mind, body, and the spiritual component of that. I think that let's talk a little bit more about that spiritual component, why that is necessary, why that is needed. And I think what I want to come at it from is from that identity perspective, who we are as people, who we're created to be. Because unfortunately, so many times people create identity as, you know, what you do defines who you are.
Right.
So how do you, through your program, help those veterans and first responders too go through your program?
Right.
How do you help them discover that why, or that identity piece as to who they are?
Right. Right. Well, I think first it's helpful for them to recognize that what they've been doing hasn't been working. They're not on our doorstep by accident. And so they maybe were a Navy SEAL, and their identity is still in that trident. And over time, we help them understand that is not their identity, that's not the totality, and we help them look in the windshield instead of the rearview mirror. But then ultimately, you get to identity in Christ. And the identity in Christ is really essential, because everything else is sort of shifting sands. You know, you're a SEAL for a period of time, but you get hurt. You're a professional football player before you get hurt. There's a professional football player, Washington Commanders, I was talking to yesterday. He's had a season, maybe a career-ending injury, and we just had a wonderful time sharing that life is more than football. And to be honest, I suggested to him, I used your example. I said, Chad Hennings, for instance, is a great example. Chad was wonderful on the football field, but he's a person that understands his identity is not in that cowboy uniform, but it's in the significance of other ways of contributing, which he's doing now. So, yeah, identity is critical. It's a critical element. And then you mentioned purpose and calling. I say that the golden thread of resilience is calling. At first I didn't think this, but when I went through all the times of reflection and writing, calling popped up in every one of the categories of the resilience life cycle. I haven't mentioned that, but resilience life cycle is what do we do ahead of time to prepare for the storms of life? What do we do during the storms of life to hide under the shelter of God's wings until destruction passes by? And what are our actions on contact there? And then after the fact, how do we bounce back? Looking through the rearview mirror, to reflect, guarding our primary relationships, grieving well, defeating bitterness with gratitude and forgiveness, and then looking through the windshield to revalidate your call, to comfort others with that which you've been comforted. And then I forget the third one.
Yeah.
But so the point is, at the very first, calling is it's know your call. That's one of the elements. In the storm, remember your call. You gain mental altitude. With height comes perspective, and when all heck is breaking loose, you're able to have that perspective. Remember your call, and then after the fact, revalidate your call. Because God uses difficult times to determine our next azimuth.
And
Yeah,
that's
if that makes sense.
I
Yeah.
remember a military chaplain one told me that we as people, we need something to believe in, to belong to, and something to become.
That's great. That's
3
great.
Ds. And that fits very much into what you're talking about there. Resilience. Are we born with it? Are we made with it?
Great question. You know the answer, like leaders, both. We're born with it. We all have a different resilience quotient, but then we also can learn resilience. And when I established the Institute for Military Resilience at Liberty University, and they said, what do you want to do? And I said, we want to do this with curriculum, with outreach programs, with research about how to help military veterans. And they were debating what we call it, grit or hardiness. And I said, no, the military is investing billions of dollars right now in resilience to try to figure out this suicide problem and other things, mental and behavioral health. And so we ought to ride that. And so we did ride that. And as I did research on it, I saw that people are born with it, but also you can train it, and that's why we established that whole Institute for Military Resilience. A couple of examples, if I may. One, I had a helicopter crash in Macedonia. Long story, I won't go into the details, but we hit a high power line. The pilot in the upper left seat, and I was in the right rear holding on to a D ring in the seat so I could see him. All of a sudden he said, "Oh God." And that's not a good thing from
From a pilot perspective, yes.
So we encountered this high power line, and on a Black Hawk helicopter you have a wire cutter below and above the cockpit, just below the rotors. And so we felt this tug. We were pulling the wire, and then all of a sudden it slipped up into the wire cutter right below the rotors, and we had, they say, like 10,000 volts of electricity going to the helicopter, but we were grounded. We weren't harmed, but all the controls were out and things, and it was just like a out of balance washer, like crazy. And the pilots were trying to get auto rotation. They actually got it about 50 feet above the ground. Nobody died. We were landed between an embankment and a drop off. So when that happened, one of the helicopter crew chiefs comes to me. He rips the Velcro flight qualification off of his thing and throws it on the ground and says, "Sir, I can't handle this. I'm out of here." It's sort of interesting because we were in bad guy country and like, okay, where are you going to go? But he was traumatized to that degree. And so now the other crew chief comes to me. The other crew chief, same age, same training in the military, same this, same that. He comes to me and says, "Well, sir, that was special. Now what's next?" Okay, so you have these bookends of resilience. And then similarly, I was a fellowship in London, Royal College of Defense Studies. We met a lovely group. He was a professor at Oxford and a lovely lady. The lady, after we went to an event, she said, "Hey, can we go visit my sister in London?" We went to the flat. The sister, who was 2 years different, answered the door, and I thought it was the mother or the grandmother. it was incredible contrast. And so over dinner, I said, well, tell us about your story. The two ladies, as 15 and 17-year-olds, has been captured at Camp Stanley prison camp in Hong Kong, and they were under Japanese prisoners for 3 years. And the Japanese raped 10,000 civilians in that precinct in the first month. And so you can only imagine what they went through. And yet at the end of this 50 years, you have one lady that's lovely, vivacious, optimistic, and the other one that's shriveled by cancer of bitterness from the inside out, outside in. And some of that was the ability, as I got to know them better, the ability to deal with bitterness and anger and all those things, toxic emotions. But conversely, they also had a different resilience quotient. And so, yes, both.
Yes, all the above. Well, I just appreciate that aspect of listening to that story of bouncing back, and that unfortunately to establish resilience, you have to experience some event that causes you to make a choice. Which way do I go? And to the point where you own that. And it's a lot of times I've always heard individuals say it's not why, why God, why me, but okay, what next?
Exactly. Yeah. Why is a pretty fruitless question. I mean, as you know, you and I have talked about this in some of my writing. I talk about stinking thinking related to suffering and tribulation. It says in a good book, we will have tribulation. So I tell people to get over it. Okay, you're going to have it. Don't act surprised. It's going to happen. It's theoretical, but when it happens to you, it's raw, it's real, it's visceral. And you got to deal with it. You got to be resilient through it.
Right, and great segue to another quote I just from the book. It said, "For each of us, the spillage will be either resignation or resilience." We have a choice. I mean, it is a true mental choice, and it almost describes the aspect of free will, and that free will, it's a pathway of decisions.
Right.
We choose this, we choose that, we choose this, just based upon the experiences that we have. So resilience is a choice.
Yeah, it really is. We talked about red lines earlier. Your mindset and your choice, your commitment can happen early on. This Resilient Warriors book was sort of a breakthrough because a lot of people talk about bouncing back, but they don't talk about what does it take ahead of time to set the conditions so that you can bounce back. When the car wreck happens, you're not going to have the right reflexes if you haven't worked it, if you haven't trained it and all that. In response to trauma, this whole notion of pain into purpose is powerful. The whole notion, quoting the good book again, it says in James, "Dear friends, is your life full of difficulties and temptations?" Okay, it says, "Then be happy." Well, that's a commitment. Then be happy. You're kidding. Difficulties, temptations. I just had a body slam. Whatever. Then be happy, for when the way is rough, your patience has a chance to grow. So let it grow and don't try to squirm out of your problems, because when your patience is finally in full bloom, then you will be strong in character, full and complete. So, there's a process there, and early on it says, count it all joy in some versions, or then be happy. Well, that's hard to do. But if you learn reflexively that it's presumptuous to gauge an outcome immediately when it happens, oh, that stinks, or that's the greatest thing since sliced bread. Well, many times in life's journey, you find out that those things that really stink are the very things that was the open door, the window, the process of growth that led to something totally, beyond what you ever dreamed of. So.
And that reminds me too of, again, back to mindset, that Carol Dweck's book on mindset, the growth mindset, the fixed mindset.
Right.
We all should strive to have that growth mindset that, I can improve. I take the experiences, what next? All things do work for the good for those who love him and are called according to his purpose. In your book, you talked about misconceptions of trauma too. You mentioned Joe Stowell's book, The Upside of Down, where he equates pain to trauma and kind of outlines different misconceptions of trauma. What you were just talking about.
Right.
That pain is punishment. May not be. Pain is unproductive. Pain indicates spiritual failure. Pain is not good. And pain is incompatible with a God who is good and all-powerful. Elaborate a little bit just on those points as to why sometimes we should, in the Army, embrace the suck.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, right.
That what can I learn from this? It's not, again, to that question, why, but what next?
Yeah, that's right. Well, the SEALs say the only easy day is yesterday. And so it's important to recognize biblical truths that highlight that God uses hardship to fortify us, to galvanize us, and that's very important. The one in there I think is pretty interesting about spiritual failure. It says that it's an indication of spiritual failure if you have pain in your life. Well, just think of the Apostle Paul or John the Baptist. Just think of all those, or think of real life folks, Johnny Erickson Tata, who's done wonderful. So there's all sorts of counter examples of how people that have had pain in their lives have just really blossomed, and I a lot of different interpretations, but Charlie Kirk's scenario, that was tragic, and yet there's going to be incredible things that result from that. And we clearly pray and grieve for his family and things, and yet the changed lives that will result from that are, God's sovereign work. And so that's an illustration. Now you ask, how do we convince people of that when they're within our under our wings there at the National Center for Healthy Veterans? It's different for all of them, but we help understand their story, and usually, frankly, we get back to their childhood. We get back to who how their father treated them, and then they want to play woulda, coulda, shoulda, for their whole life story, and eventually we get to the point where we help them focus forward rather than back. And I wish I could say there's a cookie cutter, but there's not. We have coaches, we have licensed professional counselors, we have equine therapists, and it takes this whole team working a particular person and personality to figure out how to break the code so that they can view life differently.
And that's a great point, that each of us have our own story, and what story are we continuing to tell ourselves? And that's where that whole aspect of mindset, reshifting that mindset, sometimes get it off of ourselves, why me, woe is me, to I was created for so much more, and difference. Try to land this plane here.
Okay.
In today's culture, I just see a lack of resilience.
Right.
In our younger generations. What do you attribute that to? I mean, do you see it that way first and foremost? But
I see it that way. I definitely agree with you, and I think parenting is critical. The family is one of God's appointed organizations, and the family organization, the parenting aspect is critical. If little Johnny skins his knee, and if we sort of accommodate little Johnny and say, oh, poor little Johnny, this and that, rather than having a more realistic approach, said, okay, golly, what do we learn from this? Or, okay, that'll be okay, a little in a few minutes type of thing. It's just a mindset that happens from the very first, what I would call a resilient mindset. And then eventually that leads into a heart set also, because we're fearfully and wonderfully made, and the mind, the heart, the mind, body, spirit, all connected. And so if we get them headed in the right direction at first, then we have a much better chance. The problem is, in the last decade, we've seen colleges institute puppy rooms, or where people go pet puppies because they've been emotionally offended, and words have become weapons. And if somebody says something to you, it offends you, and all of a sudden you have this, your rights have been violated. All of that is stinking thinking from a cultural perspective that leads to very unresilient responses within a lot of our population. And there's still great American youth, there's still resilient people, but I'd say per capita, it's a national security issue, because we don't have nearly the resilience. Less than a quarter of America's youth can qualify for the military. And that's not even whether they want to or not, that's just their ASFAB, their physical fitness and so forth, or their criminal records. So we have a serious problem with resilience, and that's why I feel so committed to this. This book has been rebranded as the Resilience God Style, and a whole series of video series. There's a 30-hour video series. There's a resilience training game. There's workbooks, and all of that, because when I wrote that Resilient Warriors book, I saw it applied to the military, but I saw how generally applicable it was, and so now we've done this with it. Yeah.
So before we close it out, just tell people how they can get in touch with you, how they can get a copy of the books and the content that you have.
Oh, of course. We'll go to ResilienceGodStyle.com, and ResilienceGodStyle.com has a lot of resources. It's got books on it, yes, but it's got a lot of other resources that you may find valuable. And then also for the National Center for Healthy Veterans, you can go to healthyveterans.org. That's where you learn about what we're doing, but also we need referrals. I need talent scouts all across this nation to find those veterans that are at risk, refer them to us on the website, and we'll take care of our fellow Americans. So thank you in every way. And I would just say resilience, as we've talked about, is a critical life skill from cradle to grave. And so let's all be resilient ourselves, and then let's help others do the same, because it's critical. We will all have adversity. But Jesus says, take courage, I've overcome the world. So by becoming more resilient is a way we take courage and we overcome the things about us. So God bless you. Thanks.
Bob, thank you so much. That was awesome. And for those of you watching, if you like the content, follow us on social media. Go to my website, chadhennings.com, to learn more about what we're trying to do here. But above all, I want to encourage each and every one of you to go out and become a force of character. Thank you. See you next time.